Good day, everyone. We are the Group 9 and we will continue the discussion of the Group 8. First, I am John Conrad David Duran and I will be your first presenter of the day. Example SAD. God inclines our soul without necessitating it. It must not be asked why who does sins. Since this free act is contained in his notion, but only why who does the sinner is admitted to existence. This is the quotation of Leibniz. Next is, at the first glance, this question look quite challenging. The language used in the quotation is rather obscure, and it is perhaps not immediately obvious why philosophical questions are at issue here. We need to look for the keywords in this quotation, but as it is likely that these issues will have been raised in your lecture and seminars, they should not be too difficult to pinpoint. Sabi dito, kailangan natin hanapin si keywords sa quotation na God inclines our soul without necessitating it. It must not be asked why the who does sins. Since this free act is contained in his notion, but only why who does the sinner is the admitted to existence. So, napansin ko, ang keyword natin is the God and sins. Although initially, the keywords might seem to be God and sins, if we look again, we notice the who does the sinner. Kung makikita nyo may kulay yellow yung who does the sinner, is being used only as an example. That the true focus of the discussion, which the example is being used to illustrate in a notion of freedom and necessity. So, this is the philosophy of Leibniz. Sabi dun sa una natin discussion, ginamit lang si Judas as a sinner is for example use, and this is the true philosophy of Leibniz. Was the view that God freely choose the best world from an infinite number of possible worlds, and that person could be said to act freely when the contrary of that action does not imply a contradiction. Ang ibig sabihin lang nito na ang Diyos ay may malayang pumili ng pinakamagaling o pinakamahusay na mundo mula sa walang katapusang bilang or infinite, kumbaga, na mundo na ang isang tao ay masasabing malayang gumalaw o kumilos kapag ang kasalungat ng aksyon or ng galaw ay hindi nagpapahiwatig ng isang contradiction. Next is, the problem of free will is the key topic of philosophical debate. Namely that, if I cannot choose to act otherwise, it is questionable whether my act is the product of my free will. So we can see that the focus of the quotation, and therefore of our essay, is the question of whether we have free will. Ang ibig isang example lang nito na ang ibig sabihin lang nito na ang tao ay may kalayaang mabuhay hanggat gusto mo. Pero may limitation tayo. Sa bawat galaw mo may pwedeng mangyaring mabuti at masama. Kunwari, nasa bahay ka, kasama mo mama mo, and 7 years old ka pa lang, at yung bahay nyo, tabing kalsada. Ayaw ng mama mo maglalaro ka sa labas, kasi nga, delikado. Kasi tabing kalsada lang, maraming dumadaan sa sasakyan. Pero gusto mo. May kalayaan kang maglaro, pero hindi na nga lang sa labas. Pwede ka maglaro sa likod ng bahay nyo, pwede ka maglaro sa loob. Kasi, pwedeng maging resulta nito, pag naglaro ka sa labas, pwedeng magkaroon ng hindi magandang resulta. Kaya those restrictions will guide you not only in the bad side, but also in the good side. Yung restriction na yon, ginawa yon para sa'yo din, para makabuti, hindi lamang sa pansarili, kundi sa nakakarami. Yun lang po. Salamat.
The essay question posed here is much more open-ended than other assignment we have considered. So the first task is to analyze what would count as a good answer to it, and what sort of discussion is required here. So if you are accustomed to writing literature essay, The form of this question may look familiar. It is important to remember that this is a philosophy assignment. The focus needs to be on philosophical idea and arguments, not on literary criticism. By the same token, we should avoid getting sidetracked into religious debates about sin. So we need to focus on distinctive philosophical issues of free will and necessarily raised by this quotation. However, there remains more than one ways of tackling this topic in response to the question. For instance, should we focus on Leibniz's account of free will and necessity? Or should we discuss the challenges raised by seeking to balance free will and necessity using the Leibniz quotation as an example, but also exploring other approaches? If, however, it is part of a more general problem in philosophy course, then it may be a equal acceptable to compare and contrast the quoted approach with other in the philosophical literature. It is worthwhile to check whether a particular approach is prepared by your course tutor. For instance, if this assignment is part of a course on modern philosophy, then it is likely to be expected that your essay will focus on exegesis and critical analysis of Leibniz's particular theory. If appropriate, seek clarification. Remember that your essay will be graded on how you will answer the question, so it is crucial not to misinterpret it. If this does not determine for you which interpretation you should adopt, then it is a good idea to state in your introduction how you intend to approach the question. An explanation of your understanding of the problem will help your reader to see precisely how your subsequent argument answered the question.
Good day, I am Glyza Cabangon and here is the continuation of the report. So we have here another factor to bear in mind is your word limit. If this is a short essay, then it may be possible only to analyze Leibniz's view in sufficient depth. You will always need to make difficult decisions about what to include and what to leave out, and it can be useful to make this process explicit. For example, this particular assignment might prompt you to say that Leibniz's position also raises interesting philosophical questions about the nature of sin, whether it is inevitable, and whether it is even, in some sense, ultimately desirable, but this lies beyond the scope of the essay. So earlier, if we discussed about the keywords and all in order to um, explain or understand the phrase or what or the statement of Leibniz. So now we are talking about the um, word limit. So, di ba kapag minsan gumagawa tayo ng essay or ng reflection, tapos kailangan natin i-explain yung isang statement, madalas di ba napapalayo tayo, tas ang dami nating nagagamit ng words. At yung mga words na yun is hindi na siya related dun sa kailangan natin i-explain. So, dito, sa topic natin ito, um, kailangan nating i-connecta yung mga words or statement na gagamitin natin at mag-focus lamang dun sa mga keywords upang ma-explain natin ng maayos yung ating reflection in our own opinion. Hindi dapat tayo lalampas dun sa scope natin kasi maiiba na mas magiging wide na yung essay natin at hindi na siya magiging precise or hindi na ma-emphasize yung ating binibigyang reflection. So, kung possible maging result ng ating essay kapag hindi natin ni-bear in mind yung word limit is maging broad yung ating reflection or mawalan ng connection yung ating explanation dun sa statement na kailangan nating i-reflect. At bukod dun, possible din na mag-exceed tayo sa use of words at maging sobrang haba ng essay natin. Eh, 'di ba ang boring naman basahin ng essay na sobrang haba na, hindi naman necessary yung mga words na nandun pero nagagamit natin para lang, mas mukhang, okey tingnan yung ating essay pero hindi. Mas maganda is direct at saka yung precise lang yung words na gagamitin natin. The essay title includes the quotation for a reason. So let us start with this and apply to it our philosophical reading skills. This should help us to identify the core components of our argument and how this might fit together. So we all know that quotations are very helpful for us to understand a statement or anything that we read, right? And it is also part of our philosophical reading skills. And it should help us to identify the core components of the argument. So let's start here with the skeleton argument. The skeleton argument are the questions that we can use, or these questions may help us in order for us to figure out the scope and the word limit of our essay or reflection. So the questions included are: what does the quotation mean? What are the key ideas discussed? How do they relate to each other? What is the structure of the argument? What are the reasons for saying this? What are the supporting arguments if they are not included in the quotation itself? And why is this question important? What follows from it? Is this position successful? Are the premises true? Does the conclusion follows? What are the consequences of this view? Does it raise any problems? Can this problem be overcome and how? These questions provide an argument structure which we can use as basis for our essay. It now remains to fill in the content.
Good day, my name is Kate C. De Leon. So let's proceed na po. Let us explore how we might do this for the first section, interpreting and analyzing the title quotation. God inclines our soul without necessitating it. It must not be asked why who the sins, since pre-act is contained in his notion, but only why who does the sinner is admitted to existence. If we are going to analyze each line, may malalim pa rin siyang kahulugan na nais ipahayag ni Leibniz dito. We have three claims for this matter. First, God inclines our soul but without necessitating it. Ginawa ng Diyos ang kaluluwa kahit hindi naman niya tayo kailangan. Hindi siya nag-alinlangan gawain o likhain ang ating kaluluwa dahil it's His choice to create us. Second, it must not be asked why who the sins, because this pre-act is contained in his notion. It must not be asked why kasi hindi naman natin dapat talagang tanungin pa kung bakit nagkasala si Judas. Dahil tayo ay may malaya at may kanya-kanyang tadhana na tinatahak at meron din tayong sariling mga desisyon na ginagawa na sa tingin naman natin ay tama. Kung nagkasala si Judas, yun ay dahil sa sitwasyon na kinakapalooban niya bilang tao at desisyon niya lahat yun, na nangyayari din naman sa atin. Third, but we can ask, why Judas the sinner is admitted to existence? Pwede nating tanungin na, why Judas the sinner is admitted to existence? But base sa free act claims, we can see that Leibniz believed na meron tayong free will statement based dun sa 1 and 2, kung saan makikita natin ang absence ng necessity and free acts. So, dumako naman tayo dito sa mga sumunod niyang linya. Why does it mean to incline our soul? To be admitted to existence, for something to be contained in one's notion. And we probably need to go back to our notes to do some more research. To understand this fully, here we can begin to see the first two sections of our skeleton argument. What does the notion mean? And what are the reasons for saying it? may blur into another, we need to discover some Leibniz supporting claims in order to analyze the detail of the quotation itself. So, according to the thoughts of Leibniz, we establish the relevant principle as we have our own concepts. For example, based po dito for instance, that each human being is a unity of the complete concept, a script of all that can be said to be true or him or himself. Dun sa sinasabi niyang example na script, doon nakasaad ang tadhana na bumubuo sa ating pagkatao. This script includes our actions, dialogue and situations, failures and success that will mold us to be a person, to be a better person. Yun yung binubuo ng pagkatao na tinutukoy niya. So, kung sa interpretation, lumalabas na si Judas ay isa rin siya na mayroong sariling script. Kung saan naniniwala si Leibniz na yung pagkakasala ni Judas, nangyari yun dahil siya si Judas. 'Di ba? Medyo negative siya sa part natin kasi nga Judas is known as the sinner. But actually it's not. Sa case ni Judas, Leibniz believe na si Judas ay sinner hindi dahil sa masama siya. As a matter of fact, isa siyang, as we all know, as apostoles na sumusunod kay Jesus. Judas' mistakes or sin is just a part of his script that Leibniz believe. So, kung hindi siya nagkasala, hindi siya yung Judas na kilala natin. So, that's all po. Move on po to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Arden Oliver Buton. This is the continuation of Kate's topic. We could say more about the meaning of that quotation. We already have enough material to anticipate some of the issues that will need tackling in the third section of our essay, where we can critically evaluate the implications of the quotation. On the one hand, Leibniz talks of free acts. On the other, he claims that such acts are contained in the notion of Judas or any other individual. So, sinasabi lang dito na naniniwala si Leibniz na ang bawat isa sa atin ay mayroong free acts or free will na sabihin or gawin yung mga nais natin. Pero sa kabilang banda, sinasabi niya din dito na kung ano man yung actions na nagawa mo, yun ay dahil sa paniniwala mo, which implies na hindi siya magiging si Judas or hindi ka magiging ikaw kung hindi mo ginawa yung ginawa mo or iba dapat yung ginawa mo. Sa senaryo na ito, you will not be known as you if you do not do what you did. Pero in real life, if we made mistakes, the important is we regret it. And the lesson is, you won't be a better version of yourself if you haven't done or learned from your past or mistakes. How do we reconcile these claims? How can Judas' acts be free if he could not have done otherwise? How could he have done otherwise if this act is contained in his notion? These claims we'll discuss with the next presenter. This is a good example of how philosophical argument can require us to use language in very precise ways in order to make our point clear. So let us explore how we might develop a full draft of section of the essay. At first reading, this statement seems to make two conflicting claims. On the one hand, Judas' sin is a free act, which implies that he could have chosen to do otherwise. Sabi dito, if Judas' sin is free act, why did he choose to be a sinner rather than to do good? On the other hand, Judas' sin is contained in his notion, which in Leibniz philosophy means that Judas' sin is part of the complete concept of Judas, and thus, if he had done otherwise, he would not have been Judas. Sinasabi din naman dito na Judas' sin is contained in his notion, na kung saan ang kasalanan ni Judas ay kasama daw sa pagkatao niya, at kung iba naman ang ginawa niya or kapag tama ang ginawa niya noon, hindi siya magiging si Judas. These two are really conflicting claims. Miss Ilagan will discuss it. That's all. Thank you.
Good day everyone. So bago ko ipagpatuloy ang discussion, nais ko muna magpakilala. I am Laika Banatlaw Ilagan, but you can call me Likes. So base nga dito sa diniscuss ni Miss Boton, makikita natin yung representation ng analysis ng dalawang claims. So sa pamagitan ng mga salitang than otherwise, makikita natin dun sa dalawang claims is mas naging malinaw tayo at nagkaroon ng idea kung bakit ba meron talagang conflict dun sa dalawang claims na yun.
So, totoo naman talaga na pwedeng hindi ginawa ni Judas yung kasalanan niya. Pero, how can we reconcile these two claims to avoid a direct contradiction? So, syempre, sa paggawa ng isang essay, hindi naman maganda na direktahan natin kontrahen yung sinasabi ng isang philosopher or author. So, dito, we must begin to show or use some right words or precise use of language. So, in order to defend the logic of Leibniz's statement, kailangan natin i-differentiate yung two different senses of the claim that Judas could have done otherwise. So, as I said earlier, dito natin kailangan yung mas precise na paggamit ng language. Halimbawa na lamang is dun sa ginawa ni Leibniz na dinistinguish niya yung dalawang claims sa pamamagitan ng absolute and hypothetical necessity. Kung saan, dun sa absolute necessity is the opposite is self-contradictory, while on the hypothetical necessity relies on the truth. Kung saan God exists, God created the best of all possible worlds, and X is part of the best of all possible worlds. So, after natin ngang ma-differentiate yung dalawang claims kanina, so pwede na tayong gumawa ng equivalent distinction, kung saan mas naliwanagan tayo dun sa pagkakaiba ng dalawang claims. So, sa part din na ito is, kailangan nating malaman if yung paggamit ba ng technical language is nakatulong or hindi, or useful ba yung paggamit ng logical notation. So, Judas' sin is not absolutely necessary. So, hindi siya self-contradictory. So, pwede nating isuggest na he did not sin. So, in this sense, he could have done otherwise. However, the existence of Judas the sinner is hypothetically necessary. So, it is part of this best of all possible world. So, in this sense, he could not have done otherwise. So, bago ako mag-goodbye, nais ko lang i-share yung nabasa ko na good people are not always moral people. So, this is because yung moral people daw is mas concerned sila sa rules and laws na kailangan sundin. While good people is mas iniisip nila yung tamang gawin. They must to do what is right. So, kunyari, may nakita kang isang pulubi na kumuha ng pagkain sa isang store. So, anong gagawin mo? Pipiliin mo bang maging isang moral o na in a way na isusumbong mo yung pulubi sa may-ari? Because alam naman natin na yung stealing is against the law, or you choose to be a good person kung saan ikaw yung mag-o-offer na magbayad nung pagkain because you feel it is the right thing to do. Alam ko na magkakaiba tayo ng gagawin, pero ayon nga kay Leibniz, human action is further freed, kung saan malaya tayong gawin kung ano yung gusto natin. Tama man ito or hindi. Kagaya na nga lang ng lagi naming nababanggit kanina na Judas could have done otherwise. Pwede namang di siya nagkasala. Kaso nga lang, yun siya eh. Nasa konsepto na niya yung magkasala. So, hindi siya si Judas kung hindi siya nagkasala or iba yung ginawa niya. So, yun lang po and thank you.
Good day everyone. My name is Clayton Ebonia and I'm the next reporter. This removes the contradiction between the two claims. and so renders the argument sound. This one is talking about the previous slide. About argument sound, it is an argument that is valid and all of its premises are true. Our actions and those of Judas are not absolutely necessary, but the word is such that it follows necessarily that Judas will choose to sin. Based on my own analysis, it says in this argument that the existence of Judas is hypothetically necessary. To answer the question here on the right side, that does conclusion follow from the premises? Yes, because it is part of this best of all possible worlds into the premises that God exists. As Leibniz writes elsewhere, the reasons of these contingent truths incline without necessitating. A contingent truth is a true proposition that could have been false. It is true then that I could fail to go in this journey, but it is certain that I shall go. Does this additional example add anything new to our argument? Yes, he states here that the contingent truth, which can be the true, could have been false. And the statement here that he was still continuing even though he know he would fail. Does it need more explanation? Leibniz defines a sufficient reason as a sufficient condition. Therefore, no need for another explanation. However, it is arguable that the freedom offered here is very limited. Even if our actions are not absolutely necessary, are we truly free if it is certain that I will do X? If it is contained in my notion that I do so, it could be argued that this is no more than an illusion of freedom. From my perspective, it seems that I could have chosen otherwise, but from a God's eye view, it follows necessarily that I do X. It is of little comfort to believe that I could have failed to do X in a different possible world, if it necessarily I choose to do X in this one. If the argument is sound, meaning is good, but we wish to reject its conclusion, then we need to find a flaw in one of the premises. In this example, that the required notion of could have done otherwise is inadequate. The could have done otherwise, this is an argument claims that we cannot act other than the way our beliefs and desire cause us to act. Language here needs to be really precise. Is this an accurate representation of the argument, or has the meaning been altered? It is necessary to use the exact meaning of the word to be more precise, like the letter X. Need to put what is the real meaning of that. Is necessary being used carefully enough? I think it is properly used and well enough to understand.